Hey, self-improvement family, a better world starts with a better you, and yes, you can. Today we've put together a high-performance masterclass, so let's get to it. My goal is to provide as much perspective as possible at all times for you, and today I brought together three absolute leaders who have really unique angles into what it means to be a high performer. The consensus isn't really what you'd expect. The key to high performance is actually to do less. So listen up if you're curious to find out more about what that means. In this masterclass, I'll be featuring two conversations. One was a live podcast episode with time management expert Laura Vanderkam and serial entrepreneur Ryan Blair. And the other one was a quick conversation with the king of monotasking. His name is Thatcher Wine. But you don't want to hear from me. We've got three incredible guests, so let's get to it. Let's get this high performance masterclass started right now. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Better Together community, where we believe that a better world starts with a better you. And yes, we can. We are live, and you can sign up to join us next time by visiting selfimprovementdailytips.com. Today, we've got a 2-for-1 as part of our high performance masterclass. So first, self-improvement family, meet Laura Vanderkam. Laura, meet self-improvement family. She is a foremost expert in time management and productivity, having written multiple best-selling books, delivering a TED Talk with millions of views, and more than anything, we're just lucky to have her today. And then to complement that self-improvement family, meet Ryan Blair. Ryan is a serial entrepreneur who has built massive businesses, and he's worked with some of the most influential people in the world. And he's also a best-selling author. So we are in great company today. Together, Laura and Ryan bring a powerhouse of experience and ideas that will help you to become the high performer that you aspire to be. So a big thank you to both of you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
What an intro. I love it because you guys are so accomplished that it's hard to pack all of that into one little concise little segment. So with this intention, right? The intention here is for a high performance masterclass. I think we'd be remiss not to talk about productivity and the value that productivity plays in our roles and how we can actually, become more efficient, optimize our lives. But, specifically, Laura, I'd love to ask you a question because this is actually a topic in your TED Talk, which is kind of the difference between being busy and being productive, right? And I just first would like to kind of get a ground floor here and understand kind of how do we differentiate between those two? How do we know what are productive tasks versus what tasks are just keeping us busy?
Yeah, well, it's very easy to mix the two up, and many of us are doing a lot. But the question is whether what we are doing is advancing us toward the lives we want or not. Because it is very easy to fill time. Basically, anyone can fill time. The question is what you are doing with that, and if you are spending enough time on the things that matter to you. So, I always encourage people to think through how they're spending their time. You can track how you are spending your time. That's something I've been doing for years now. And to really think about, are these hours devoted to steps toward my personal goals? Are they devoted to steps toward my professional goals? If they are not, why not? I mean, maybe there's a good reason. There often is. But if it isn't a good reason, what can I do about that? Or if it is a good reason, what long term can I do to make sure that these things are minimized and I'm spending more time on the things that I wish to? And usually that's about, planning our weeks ahead of time. Really looking forward to the next week and saying, well, what steps toward my long term goals do I intend to accomplish over the next week? Where do I intend to put them on my calendar? What logistics need to happen to be sure that they happen? And how can I hold myself accountable for that?
Yeah. You mentioned, two different things there. You said goals and values, which I think are really interesting. Because if you talk about, and this actually comes back to, one of my mentors, Niraj Yal, he has a book called Indistractable. And the idea there is you can only know if you're being distracted when you have something you're supposed to be doing, right? Because it takes you away from, your task. And it sounds like goals and values can be kind of that North Star in some cases. So, I guess taking even another step back. So yes, you can look at your schedule, but how can you really kind of establish those goals and values in the right way so that that the activities are actually pointing toward that productive end versus something that might be appealing in the moment?
Yeah, well, it can be goals and values can be very abstract. And, there are things that we value, you might say like time with family, learning, all that. Well, but what does that actually mean in terms of how you are spending your time? I can say I value my family, but how is that reflected in my hours? I could say that I value learning, but again, how is that reflected in my hours? And I find that often it really helps people to have some sort of structure for these things. I mean, we often a lot of people set professional goals. That's not hard. Like we're familiar with the concept, and if we're not setting them for ourselves, often our managers may have things that we are aiming for. Right? There's sort of a built-in accountability in work in the working world that there's less of in our personal lives, and unfortunately, I think that's too bad because
Hmm.
our personal lives could benefit from some of that same structure. I'm not saying like you need to send your family calendar invites for dinner, and you know you don't have to have every minute set for productive purposes, whatever that even means. But I say, well, I value time with family. Okay, well, one of the ways I'm going to show it is, let's say I'm going to build this Lego creation with one of my preteen children. Like that's a project we have. Now we have something that allows us to structure that time together that we are working toward. I can say, well, this week we're going to accomplish, bags 1 and 2 of the Lego creation, and next week it's going to be bags 3 and 4, or whatever it is. But just having that level of structure allows us to steer our time. And so I encourage people to actually bring that same mindset of the accountability we have and the mindfulness we have for work, and take our fun and our family time and our community time as seriously.
Hmm. No, you're right. There's a huge misconception that high performance and productivity is narrowly viewed through the lens of work performance or work progress. Whereas, productivity, like you said, is just doing the things that you want to do, right? It's just more of that. And that is in all of the different facets of your life. So I love that you mentioned that. Ryan, how does that land in your world? Kind of this idea, and especially, you have a lot of experience applying these goal setting frameworks and the value system of corporate cultures or businesses to be able to point people in the right direction too. So how does productivity relate in your world, seeing kind of both sides of that coin?
Well, so I agree with everything Laura is saying, and I think structure is a very important aspect of how to develop yourself as an individual. And I used to use a lot of structure in the way that I manage my time. As an entrepreneur and having built and scaled companies, I now have a tremendous amount of people that are trying to get on my calendar at all times. So I have the opposite problem where I have to basically just say no, as opposed to looking to structure my calendar. It's who am I going to basically say no to today so that I can say yes to the things that are going to move the needle the most. And I tend to evaluate what I'm going to do with my time based on the revenue impact, the profit saving impact, or the actual impact that it will have. Meaning, how many people can I reach with the work that I'm doing? I also look at the energy that I bring to my time more than I actually look at the time, because if you ever had one of those days where you were watching the clock and went really slow, some of those days are the most structured days, and those don't feel very well. And then there's those days where you accomplish so much, and you look at the day and you go, wow, look at all that I learned, look at all that I accomplished. And it might not have been the most structured day. And so I go deep into my energetic state. I do so through practices such as meditation and breath work and prayer. I'm very spiritual. And I put myself in a position where I bring the best energy that I possibly can, mentally, physically, and spiritually, to the time that I have. And I get a better yield out of that time, especially when you're in the business of leading people and influencing people. It's the energy that you bring to those meetings and energy that you bring to that is ultimately going to determine the productivity of it.
Yeah. No, that spiritual piece is a very important piece, because that, that is your center. That is the real root of everything that then becomes your output. But, backing up, you actually pointed directly at that idea of the output, which I think is really interesting, right? Laura, we were talking a lot about kind of values and goals, and that being the input, that being the original guiding factor. And then now, Ryan, you're talking about KPIs, and on the back end of how are we actually doing things that are producing, impactful and measurable, meaningful results. So I mean, that I think productivity needs to be seen from both sides of that.
Yeah, well, for me in particular, and the people that I've trained, the entrepreneurs I mentor, when you get a purpose that is greater than yourself, that you believe is your calling, your reason for being, everything else has to be stripped away by default. The distractions, the time wasters, the negative sentiment, the suffering, the hardships, all of that you have to work on and grow through in order to get to a place where you're highly optimized and productive, fulfilling the purpose that you believe you are uniquely capable of fulfilling.
Yeah. Yeah. And with that in mind, I love that's actually a perfect segue into kind of the other consideration here is, yes, productivity is one side, but then distraction is the other, right? And they're kind of this yin and yang, so to speak, or at least this kind of this push and pull relationship. Do you both, I guess, Laura, starting with you, do you have systems in place that keep you from being unproductive? Like, do you have checks and balances throughout your day? I mean, obviously you said, using a schedule to be really clear on, exactly how you're spending your time. But like, are there other just more kind of like tangible systems that you have in place that help you to be more accountable to your productive behaviors?
Well, I certainly set my intentions for each day. Like these are the things of all the universe of things I could be doing. These are the small number of things that I am committing to myself that I will do in the course of a given day. And in general, I'm aiming to get through those as I can, around, tackling the things that are hardest for me to do when I have the most energy to tackle them, as we talked about energy earlier.
Mm-hmm.
For many people, that tends to be earlier in the day. Not everyone, of course, but many people wind up with more energy sort of earlier in the day, and then it lags as the day goes on. There are ways to rejuvenate ourselves. Certainly, taking a break, getting some physical activity, getting fresh air, talking with people we enjoy. Those are all things you can do to boost your energy levels, but they're not infinite either. So we have to structure our days in order to do our best work when we're capable of doing our best work. Which some of that will make you less distracted. I mean, again, when you have more energy, you are less distractible. When you are doing things you love, you feel passionate about, as Ryan was saying, you're less distractible then. But there's always things that can come up. One of the things that I've been really encouraging people to do is in terms of not distracting themselves. That you've decided to devote a certain amount of time to whatever big problem you are working on. And then as you're doing it, you're thinking something along the lines, these things pop into your head of like, oh, I should tell my colleague about X, or, did I take the meat out of the freezer for dinner, or whatever else the distractions are that pop into your brain. And you can very easily like go deal with those. I mean, if you're working at home, you obviously can deal with the freezer issue, but the colleague one could happen wherever. And you want to just like write those things down on like a later list that you can then go back to later, because you don't want to distract yourself from this state of being deeply absorbed. Now, of course, there's other distractions that just happen too. People who are working from home may have family coming in and out. At the office, it could be colleagues who need things. And I think it's important to realize, like, well, what is a distraction and what is also just life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And particularly if you are managing people, like you do want them to talk to you. So in that sense, that's not a distraction. It may be your job, right? To manage these people and to make sure that they are supported in their system. And so, I think trying to make sure that there is time that you are fully focused on things. And then also making sure that there is adequate time where you are accessible to people that you may be leading and whose needs you need to help fulfill.
Yeah, certainly a delicate balance between that, right? Because at least for myself, like you said, because there are things that come up throughout the day that are very important to manage. They're important to prioritize even, because that's when it's best for someone else. It's best for kind of the net good. So you need to be able to accommodate that. I've actually implemented a system where I just have kind of that to-do sheet instead of the do it now, get pulled and do this, do that, just kind of document it, have it written down in one place. So, it's not going to get lost. And then you have the right time to approach it, when you can allocate the time for it. You talked about something really interesting. Actually, it transitions well, which was that idea of how we have kind of different energy levels throughout the day. And there are different tasks where we're, better positioned to do certain things at certain times because of those energy levels, almost like a chronotype of sorts. And, I think one of the misconceptions maybe of high performance is that it's 100% of the time you're on, you're perfect, it's great. But knowing that there are ebbs and flows, you need to be able to kind of play into your strengths a little bit. But specifically, as we start optimizing that process and understanding more about our own personal workflows, our own energy cycles, et cetera, we need to experiment a little bit. It's not just, put on, you don't read a book and then know for yourself exactly how things go. And that's kind of where, I think experimentation is an extremely important process as it relates to improving anything, because you need to try new things to get new results. So Ryan, as you talk about, some of these ideas, related to experimentation, whether it be your energy levels, whether it be the way that you, manage or collaborate with other people, and, kind of reserving your attention versus being open and accessible, what are some of the ways that you think about dripping in those little micro tests to be able to tweak the things that you're doing?
Well, that's a great question. I'm always challenging myself to restrict something in my life. So that's how I build willpower and self-control and discipline, is I restrict. So for example, I might put a restriction on my Instagram because I want to reduce the amount of time I spend on that. So I go into the parental timer or whatever the software is, and I say I'm only going to permit 30 minutes of Instagram a day. And so that's a restriction. Other restrictions that I've utilized are the news, for example. I found that the news was very distracting to me. So I restricted the news, I restricted television, restricted caffeine. You would think that caffeine would be a high performance tool, but it truly is not. It actually degrades your performance. And I've learned, I used to be a caffeine addict. I actually used to sell it in my last company. And I'm far more higher performer now that I've learned to restrict caffeine from my life. The other things that I restrict to try to maximize my energy would be alcohol, any types of time wasters and distractions that stop me from fulfilling my purpose. So I get to a place where I have the space to do the tasks that I'm called to do, and to make the calls that I'm called to make, and to come up with the creativity and innovation by making that space. And by making that space, I just restrict things down. So that's the primary technique that I utilize, in addition to a number of different things protocol-wise that I'm constantly doing to optimize my energy, from the quality of food that I put into my body, the amount of water that I drink, the amount of nature, the amount of sun that I have, the walks in nature, as Laura was mentioning. All of those are tools and techniques that I'm constantly dialing in. You never have a perfect system that works perfectly, because seasons change, you age, the work changes as well, and so you might need a different energetic approach to work on a different day. So you're constantly dialing in the energetic system to be able to bring the best energy that you can to your time. Because in my life as an entrepreneur, having done hundreds of millions of dollars in sales, there's times where I've showed up to a meeting and I brought a certain energy with me and everybody said yes. And then there's times I've showed up to a meeting, brought a certain energy with me, and everybody says no. And I said the same exact words, but for some reason, the energy was different. And so I've spent the better part of my last several years figuring out how to dial in a energetic system to where you're able to maximize the value that you create in the time that you do have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so important. And like you said, that kind of curiosity of tweak this, tweak that, and never hold so much value on reaching the destination, right? It's always a journey. It's always the process.
Well, once you get it working, then it plateaus, and then you got to tweak it again.
Right.
So like waking up at 4 a.m. works, and then all of a sudden you realize, well, maybe I should be waking up at 6 and working till, or staying, not necessarily working till 9, but staying up till 9 or 10 versus, when time changes, maybe waking up early and going to sleep earlier is a better strategy. And when summertime comes around, waking up later and staying up later is a better strategy.
Yeah. And do you have built-in systems or protocols around how often you check in and kind of evaluate how things are serving you? Or is it more implicit?
Well, the spiritual objective is for you to check in at, every minute,
moment by moment. Yeah.
Of every day, and to be able to say, how did I use that minute? What did I learn from that minute? Was that minute productive? That's the highest level of being intentional, whether I'm cooking or I'm spending time with my son or I'm mentoring my team. It's to make sure that every single minute is utilized to create some form of value, whether internal or external. That's the ideal. That's not necessarily the reality, because there are things that knock you off track. There are distractions. I mean, we right now have some of the most brilliant minds that have ever congregated in humanity that are all trying to steal our attention.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are brilliant psychologists and the most brilliant neurologists and software development people at the likes of Google and LinkedIn and Facebook and a variety of other companies, iPhones and so forth. They all want to steal our attention and monetize our attention, which is true theft. And they're going to use any tool in the book psychologically. Like if I happen to have a love of cat videos, man, they're going to pump me cat videos to steal me away from my purpose. And so it is you against 10,000 scientists trying to steal your attention, basically. And you have to put in systems and structures in place to ensure that you're able to maintain your attention, with all of those distractions present.
Yeah, I'm a huge advocate for that. The idea of investing in systems, and it's counterintuitive to our human nature, right? We are optimized from, habit loop perspective, to behave in ways that are congruent with receiving immediate gratification. Yet a lot of the things that are good for us have delayed gratification. So how do we kind of close the loop there in a successful way? And that's where, I spend a lot of time and teach a lot on building systems and investing the time in advance so that in the moment when you're emotional or when you're lacking discipline, whatever it might be, your environment is designed in such a way that you're more compliant with your intentions. So I think that's a huge piece. You mentioned a really important part, which is the ideal, right? Like, yes, it's great to have an ideal and, to at least articulate it, but that's never going to happen. It's just a matter of kind of starting to veer toward it. And Laura, that's where I want to really kind of hear some insight you have about time management in particular, right? Because you can have an ideal for the way that you spend your time and, getting all these things done in a day. But, there are a lot of people, call them parents, call them, managers, individuals who have other responsibilities where it really doesn't, it's not their choice, right? They don't have the agency to dictate how they spend every minute of every day because there are just other responsibilities. So what would you say to someone that's trying to kind of gain a little more accountability, a little more consistency in their life, even though some of these other, pieces might be in play?
Yeah, well, perfection is never really the goal. I mean, it's just progress. We can always get better from where we are. We will never be perfect, and nobody ever will be. But we can always move a little bit forward, and we should celebrate when we do. And I always challenge people, that anybody can create a perfect schedule. The question is whether it happens, and it won't. It won't. And I mean, maybe there's somebody who could absolutely stick to exactly what was designed, and more power to them if their life is such that is possible. But for many of us, something is going to happen, right? The roof springs a leak, your kid comes home sick from school, the car breaks down, the snow means your flight is canceled. There's just everything can happen. This is not a surprise. This is life, right? We shouldn't be surprised that something came up. Of course, something came up. So instead of trying to build a perfect schedule, we need to build a resilient schedule. And the best way to do this is just to leave some open space. Because if you block every minute, when something comes up, as inevitably something comes up, there's nowhere to put it, right? There's nowhere to put it. Either when it displaces what you originally planned to do, there's no place to put what you plan to do, or else you can't get to this great opportunity that's coming up because you don't have anywhere to put it. So you build in open space into your schedule somewhere, and then that can absorb the overflow when things go wrong, or when you didn't get to X on Tuesday because an employee needed a ton more time and attention than you planned on giving, but it was very important to do that. Well, now this open space is where the thing that you didn't get to before goes. This works differently for different people. I mean, practically, if you have sort of more control over your schedule, trying to leave an open day like Friday, trying to schedule very little for Friday, so that when stuff comes up during the week, the overflow can go on Friday. If you have less of that available, less ability to do something like that, trying to schedule an open hour or two each day. Maybe that you can purposefully have some chunk that's not scheduled in the afternoon. And then again, when something goes wrong in the morning, that's where it gets made up. So you don't fall days and days behind. It's still, you can still get to whatever you plan to get to in the morning. When something comes up in the morning, you just do it in the backup slot in the afternoon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Laura, I use your technique. I schedule 90 minutes a day, open space. no matter what. And that's untouchable. No one's allowed to put anything there, because I have a lot of people that are trying to put things on my calendar, because that's, the way, the business is structured is, there's a number of people that want to get on my calendar to talk about initiatives and projects and things like that. And that hour and a half is my time that I get to catch up on. I might, do a quick meditation, do a reset, take my dog for a walk, have a nap. But no matter what, I have that hour and a half space on my calendar.
Yeah, and it's really smart to do. And I'm glad that you protect it like that. I think a lot of people struggle with the idea of protecting it because, again, like you said, there's lots of great people who are trying to get on your calendar. And you're like, wait, this person's been trying to meet with me for weeks, and here I am saying, nope, not today either. Sorry. But it's not a rude indulgence. Like, that time will be filled with something. It serves a purpose, and it is there to make sure that there is still space for the actions that lead to your goals, even when life happens, right? Even when the things that are unexpected come up, even when things go wrong, even when great opportunities come up. So the open space isn't completely open. It's that it's there for the unknown.
Yeah. I mean, I'm learning so much. This is amazing. I think there's a thread of expectation in there too, where if you expect to be productive every hour of every day, then that's just not sustainable also. So Ryan, I love that you actually block out 90 minutes, which is part of your self-care routine. These are the things you need to get done, because sometimes less is more. You can get more done by spending less time doing it because of the concentration of value that you can apply, right? And I think that's something that's overlooked a lot, is how can you provide 10 units in 1 hour versus 1 unit in 10 hours, right? Like, we would much prefer to have that concentrated, kind of flow of value. And Laura, even what you're mentioning earlier, there's actually a thread of experimentation there that you're mentioning, right? Which is like, block out. Is it 1 hour? Is it 2 hours? I'm just showing you, this is my little remarkable tablet, and I've got my calendar blocked out, where I'm actually in the process of every evening figuring out, okay, what did I schedule myself for? Yep, that added on to, okay, this is difficult. And I have those little kind of time blocks. And, Ryan, you've been able to hone in over years to know that 90 minutes is kind of the right balance for you and everything that you have, so that's just, again, kind of a thread of the previous topic, which was like this piece of experimentation. I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, the other thing I'll tell you is if there happens to be more blank space on my calendar, I don't try to go fill it, because there's days where I've got 18 things that are they're scheduled, and if there's only 6 things scheduled tomorrow, I want to use that for talking to people, replying to people, getting people on the phone that weren't scheduled and wasn't planned, having conversations with the team that aren't planned, maybe checking in on a project. So I'm not looking to try to occupy every minute on the calendar, but I am in the position where I have drivers onto my calendar. So when I do get some blank space, I put it to good use, and I don't try to fill it as much as I can, because there's always stuff that you're not getting done. There's always your inbox is always going to be filled. When you're running a growing business, you're never going to have the gratification of saying you have an empty inbox. There's nothing left to do for the day. There's always more that you can do, because you have multiple projects, multiple products, multiple initiatives, different things going on, that you could constantly be doing stuff that does drive the ball forward. And you have to develop the discipline of just saying, that's it. That's all I'm going to do today. I'm not going to try to, keep cramming more and more in, because I know that a lot of overachievers get that gratification out of checking the box. They cross something off their list, and that can become a very disruptive thing to your creativity. And like Laura said earlier, to having the space for creativity and for having the space to maybe pursue an opportunity or to dive into a subject that wouldn't be traditionally scheduled through your environment.
Yeah. This is such a refreshing conversation, because, we're talking about high performance, and the theme that's come out of it is doing less, right? And there's just like such a culture of go, go, go busy. And not to say that that's not warranted. Like, if you want to get anything done, you got to do the work, right? But there's this underlying message, which I think should be probably a predominant message, which is about, how can you be better? It's not about doing more. It's about, how can you be better? And that's what productivity is about. It's about improvement versus, busyness, or whatever that might be.
But there are certain job functions that are more transactional. that require when you're a CEO of a company and you're an entrepreneur, you have more flexibility, but there are certain jobs that don't have as much flexibility. And so a lot of the tactics that Laura teaches and structuring and so forth are so important when you have to touch, say, 30 transactions a day or something like that. Otherwise, you're not able to leave the office, right? So you really have to optimize in those environments. And I have team members that have more transactional roles in the business. So I have to, get them to have a higher yield and a higher output than, let's say, I have to have as the role of a CEO.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good point. Is it's definitely contextual. Absolutely. All right, cool. We're going to move into our last topic before, I guess, last question before taking some questions. So Jacob, Clara, Lily, anyone who has a question, go ahead and put it in the chat. In the meantime, Ryan, I'm going to come back to you here because, especially with a startup environment and a lot of the, businesses that you've grown, you have some great experience here, which is, being able to step in and take on risk. I feel like a lot of people are very resistant or hesitant to expose themselves to risk. But when it comes to high performance and doing better, you're going to have to, kind of put yourself out there a little bit. So what would you say to someone who is hesitant about taking risks? Like, what have you learned over the years about risk taking?
Well, you have to evaluate your, your connection to scarcity. The reason why people are afraid to take risks is because they have scarcity related issues, meaning they have a belief system that resources are limited, for example, or that things are expensive, or that that they can't achieve this objective, right? And so scarcity thinking can be a big hindrance to growing and development of an operation. Now, I always need, because I don't have that in my nature traditionally, I always need risk adverse people to surround me. So I need people that are going to give me risk assessments that I would not be inclined to, do the work to study otherwise. But to be able to take risk as an entrepreneur, you have to be brave. And to be able to be brave, you have to overcome fear. And you also have to have a good understanding of when you're thinking, through the lens of scarcity, and when it's warranted to assess the risk and to, to not take action. The other thing that I'll tell you as an entrepreneur is it's so important to say no. Steve Jobs had a quote that focus is saying no. And most entrepreneurs that I meet, and I mentor a lot of them, they say yes to too many things. They're doing NFTs and Bitcoin and their primary business and trying to get involved in real estate. And they're never going to have the amount of focus and concentration that is required to get to a level of mastery in anything. And the more successful you become, the more you have to say no to very valuable opportunities. So there are things that I have said no to that have been that have cost me hundreds of millions of dollars, and there are things that I've said yes to that have cost me hundreds of millions of dollars. So so you have to, you have to have a good understanding that you're not going to get it right all the time. That in the risk game, you're lucky if you win 60% of the time. The other 40% of the time, you're going to make the wrong decision. You're going to launch at the wrong time, or you're going to, buy the wrong company or invest in the wrong company. That's part of the nature. And so you just want to try to optimize your decision-making process, connect it to your values, as Laura was talking about earlier, and making sure that the decisions that you're making are based on the cultural values of the company, and that you're optimizing your decisions to those cultural values of the company so that you're making decisions that are within the risk profile of the vision and objective of the company.
What a summary. Yeah, absolutely. And there's that level of fidelity that you need to be able to measure so that you can evaluate and make changes on, right? So there's extra components layered on top of it, but philosophically, I think that is spot on. No, that's really, really good.
Well, one of the big risks people don't do as entrepreneurs, and I know there's a lot of solo entrepreneurs out there, and this is the hardest, in my opinion, form of entrepreneurship, is doing it alone. When you start to have a team, yes, your responsibility grows, but your ability to execute grows as well, and your ability to get leverage grows. So I mentor a lot of entrepreneurs, and I have a lot of respect for those people that do it solo. But when you actually take the risk to start adding team members is when you're really going to start to see, the beauty of entrepreneurship and the time freedom that can come with entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I've actually been experimenting with a philosophy kind of similar to that, which is, someone just needs to go first. Like someone needs to go and put themselves out there and kind of take on the risk. And then you create the platform, you create the call to action that then recruits people into it. And it does take that courage, that courage to try for other people to then get more involved. And then that scales your ability to execute and perform it. So someone's got to go first, and everyone's got a great idea, but no one, or I wouldn't say no one, but people often don't take action on it.
The universe is always expanding. And so it rewards expansion. And so if you're expanding by hiring people, by taking risk, you're going to receive the benefit of that. Yes, it does put pressure on you. And that pressure, if you extract the lessons from it, will actually grow you. It'll grow your character. It'll grow your ability to turn negative situations into positive, to resolve conflict, to negotiate. That pressure is the best teacher that you can ever get. If your desire is to become a leader as an executive or a leader as an entrepreneur.
Yeah,
I would
amazing.
just add one thing with that, getting more comfortable with risk. I think for many people, it helps to think through what your backup plans are. I mean, it's the same thing of having a resilient schedule. Like, if something goes wrong, what are you going to do? And if that option D is also going to be great, like then you can feel a little bit more comfortable going harder toward option A, because you have satisfied yourself that that's not the only thing out there, right? And so, again, with things like professional networking, and I tell people it's not about collecting business cards. It's about having a lot of people at different places, so that if you need something else to happen, you've got people to call on that can help make other situations come to fruition for you. So for many people, I think just if you're not naturally oriented toward taking a lot of risks, satisfying yourself that probably what else could happen is not that bad if option A goes wrong, can be very helpful.
I actually agree with that 100%. And
do you?
Yeah, cool. Well, because I've always done the evaluation. If everything, so I came from a very poor environment, and so I've always said to myself, I'm never going back there. And as my career grew, I didn't really care about whether I took $1 million risk or $10 million risk, because I knew that I would never go back to abject poverty. And I knew that I had developed some level of security, and the security, not only wealth-wise, but also security in my ability to create and my skills. So when you have true security in your ability to create, and in your skills to create revenue, create profits, and so forth, create companies, you're never really going to fall back when you have that. Or you might fall back, but you're never going to go to a place where you can't eat, for example, if you do have the ability to create and you have the skills connected with that.
Yeah, no, this is a very timely conversation on the podcast. I shared a tip about the idea of that will never be me. If some, like, you picture your worst case scenario, and it's like, is that really ever going to happen? Like you said, Ryan, it's a matter of confidence and certainty that, if push really came to shove, I'm gonna be okay. So I love that perspective, and you're right. That's certainly an aspect of kind of quantifying risk. And Laura, I love that addition.
It's also faith.
Yeah.
You truly have faith that, that it's all going to work out. One of the most important beliefs that you can adopt is that it's all going to work out in the end. And so when you're going through tough times, I went through disaster during the 2008 recession, a disaster during 9/11 and the dot-com bust. COVID was a major disaster. And when you're going through these very difficult times in these economic cycles, you have to really adopt the mindset that everything is going to work out in the end, and that you're going to look back at what you're going through today and the struggles that you're dealing with and the suffering that you're experiencing. You're going to look back at it and actually be grateful for it, because those struggles, those challenges are your greatest teachers.
Totally. Yeah. It's, it means that much more because I know how lived it is from you, so I appreciate that perspective. All right, we've got a string here of audience questions. Thanks everyone for putting them in the chat. Let's try and rapid fire these because I know we're running close on time here. First, and this is actually a theme with some conversation here in the chat here, which is, related to morning routines. What's the very first thing you do in the morning? There's some issues with checking phone right there, and of course we talk about high performance, your day starts at the beginning when you wake up. I would actually argue your day starts when you go to sleep. I don't know why we need to say that midnight is the beginning of a day. Your day can start whenever you choose. But Laura, what are some, what is your, I guess a quick version of your morning routine, or maybe your resilient routine, because it's never going to be ideal.
Yeah, I would say People get really hung up on the idea of a morning routine that has to happen at a certain amount, a certain time or whatever, and occupy a certain amount of, minutes, and it happens in a certain order. And the problem is, if your life is complicated, that may or may not happen, and that can get very frustrating if that's what you're aiming for. And I hear all the time from people who are like, "Well, I had a great morning routine, and then I had kids, and my routine had to change." It's like, well, imagine that, right? Like, who would have
Go
thought?
figure.
And so, not saying that you can't have a good morning routine, but I think you have to sort of be a little flexible about it sometimes. I mean, my mornings start with getting my kids up and ready for school and things like that. However, I have what I call a morning checklist
There
of
you go.
things that I want to do before I think of my workday as officially starting. And in my case, I'm reading a part of something big in the course of the year. So last year, I read through War and Peace, a chapter every day. There's 361 chapters, so I read a chapter a day
Wow.
through the year. And then I write some in my free writing file. So I write a lot for a living. So I try to do a little creative writing that isn't for anyone, just for me. This year I'm reading through all the works of Shakespeare. So I read a little Shakespeare, write some, and then I'm ready to start my work day. It doesn't happen at the exact same time every day, but I do it every day.
Mhm.
And so I think, thinking of a morning checklist can be helpful if your life doesn't lend itself to an exact morning routine.
I love that perspective. Ryan, what's your routine or checklist?
I start with meditation and prayer, first thing that I do, and I do so from a state of gratitude, and then I examine the prior day, and I look at what do I want to let go of, what do I want to leave behind, and what did I learn. From there, I go into reading and studying. So I'll study something. Generally, I'm studying something with more of a esoteric, it's more inspirational. I do skill reading in the middle of my day. So if I want to pick up a skill or work on a skill, I'll do that at a different time. And then from there, I go into a workout. And then from there, a high energy breakfast. And then I'll get my son off to school. That requires me oftentimes to wake up 3 hours before,
Mm.
he gets up. So I'm up at, 4:30, and I get him up at 7:30 for school. Sometimes I don't get a full 3 hours in. Sometimes it's two, depending on, my son's schedule and what time I went to sleep. I don't set an alarm clock. I wake up when my body tells me it's time to wake up. And I don't need a lot of sleep. I get about 6.5 hours of sleep, but I eat highly energetic foods, and I don't put anything in my body that takes away energy. I only put things that add to my energy in my body. So my sleep is very optimized, and my morning routine is pretty consistent, 7 days a week. I probably get 2 hours when I have to drop my son off to school, and then if it's homeschool, I get 3 hours.
Very cool. Yeah, Jacob, thanks for asking that question. I see that you commented again, just kind of, it's all about building momentum, right? And I think that's where Laura and Ryan really were able to figure out, like, what are those pieces that get their juices flowing, and not necessarily holding yourself accountable, I guess in Laura's case, to a specific time or like regiment to it. It just knowing that serves you. It really, it starts with knowing what serves you. How are you going to best respond to building momentum in your day? And then executing on that, with that inspiration. I love how both of you do creative work first thing in the morning. I try and I need to get better at that. I struggle with that. So I appreciate the perspective. All right, another question, Clara. Thank you Lily. Lily, thank you for asking this question. We touched on a little bit, but maybe this is a nuanced way of asking it. How do you separate your personal priorities versus other priorities? Right? We talk about productivity being not just work related, but then when it comes to priorities, how do you balance, it sounds like you both have kids, Lily, I believe you have a child as well. So how does your personal priorities interface with your work priorities, and how do you reconcile those different responsibilities?
So I would say here that, I mean, you are one person, and there are all these different parts of you. So I mean, it's impossible to separate everything. And again, you have one pot of hours. So you're trying to allocate those to the different aspects of your life. And so viewing them in opposition or totally separate from each other, I just don't think is helpful for many people, because we have things we want to do, and we have to bring our best energy to them. And some of those things have to do with our families and our communities and ourselves. And some of these things have to do with our work. And often there's overlaps between it. You may have great friends at work. You may have, community involvement with the things you do professionally. I mean, there's just all sorts of overlap here. So I don't really think about it like that. When I think about my upcoming weeks, I think about my priorities in three categories: career, relationships, and self. And I just want to make sure every week that there's something going on in all three, right? And
Mm,
I think by making a three category list, it nudges me to remember to put something in all three categories. Like, this is what I want to do for myself, for advancing my health, my spiritual welfare, my creativity, whatever, for the next week. This is something for, that's really important with my family or friends or community for the next week. And then this is something really important professionally. But as long as I'm thinking about something in each area, I know that I'm going to have a good week, and it's going to also feel like a balanced week. Like I'm not only focused on one thing, even if life winds up demanding a lot in one of those spheres versus the others. I know that something is happening in all of them, so I try to think of it that way.
yeah, that's really good. I mean, a perspective that I actually heard recently when I was working out this morning on, I think, Jordan Harbinger's podcast was the like the idea of, hold on, I lost my train of thought. Anyway, it's gone. It's escaped me. But Ryan, so like how do you kind of balance priorities in your mind? Because you have businesses, you have family as well.
I put my son first. He and I have a deal that he gets to what we call pull the ripcord. So if dad's getting too too focused on work, or I keep diving deeper and deeper into the subject, he gives me three strikes. Dad, I want some time with you. I also integrate him into my work. So I review my numbers, my dashboards with him. I explain to him the decision making that's going on, and I get his advice on it, because I'm building something for him to one day take over. So if that's what he wants to do. So I'm heavily integrating him into every decision I make. I'll talk to him about what's happening with revenue, or I had to talk to this attorney today, or whatever is going on. I want him involved in it as much as I can, so he feels connected to it, and he doesn't feel like it's taking away from him. He feels aligned that this is part of our family's purpose, is to make the impact that we do through the entrepreneurial vehicle that we're so blessed to lead. So I have him heavily integrated, and I make him a priority.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, no, I've been hearing a lot recently about the idea of work-life integration versus work-life balance. That it is, kind of one and the same, that there are elements that it's not necessarily, compartmentalized. It's very much kind of one fluid dynamic. And I remembered what I was going to say, Laura. So, I was listening to the podcast, and the topic that came up was like defining happiness. And I wish I remember who the guest was. I'm going to read his book, but I can't remember who the guest was. But it was this idea. He's a Harvard researcher. There's this idea that happiness is only possible when you're making progress on something. Happiness isn't necessarily just like a fixed element. It is the application of what you're doing in the name of growth. And I think, as you mentioned, Ryan, everything is expanding, right? This is all about growth. And, I have a self-improvement podcast, so I certainly understand that. But I think that was a perspective that definitely, aligns with what you were sharing about having these three different areas of your life that you want to have something to pursue, because then you're finding happiness in the pursuit of something versus just trying to maintain as is. All right. I want to respect everyone's time. This has been a fantastic conversation. And those who weren't part of this live, which I highly recommend that you're part of it live because it's super fun, we had some serious tech issues. So I want to say thank you to everyone for being patient and working through it. Let me find my little outro here. Perfect. Thank you, everyone, for this awesome conversation. So grateful for this community we have. And until next time, remember that we're all better together. So what did you think? I personally love how their two perspectives complement each other with reference to both the personal side of things and then also the business side of things. First, I'll share some of my takeaways from that conversation, and then we'll jump into the next one. Laura's mention of having a resilient schedule is game-changing. Don't set yourself up for failure by being overly idealistic. Know that things will fluctuate, and you need to be flexible enough to accommodate it, especially in the face of life's real responsibilities. But then Ryan's ability to clear his schedule for 90 minutes a day so that he can focus on doing the things that fuel him, like reading and walking and the other nurturing activities that he does, is incredible. If someone running multiple massive businesses can get that done, then we have no excuse. If Laura and Ryan's message and expertise stood out to you, then I encourage you to check out more of their work. You can visit Laura's website, www.lauravanderkam.com, and also Ryan's website, ryanblair.com. Both of those links are in the description. All right, now let's get into our second and final conversation of this masterclass that also touches on this theme of how to do more by doing less. We're talking about monotasking, and you get to learn all about it right now. So let's go. Hey, self-improvement family, we've got another incredible mind to learn from today. Our guest is the king of focused productivity, and his name is Thatcher Wine, author of the book, The 12 Monotasks, with a subtitle that we can all relate to: Do one thing at a time to do everything better. Thatcher, thank you so much for chatting today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So it's just such an intriguing concept, right? We've all heard about multitasking, but I had not heard of monotasking until I came across your work. So first, let's just kind of set the stage. Would you just tell us fundamentally what monotasking is and why we should care about it?
So the easiest way to think about it is that monotasking is the opposite of multitasking. We all pretty much know what multitasking is. We all probably do it, myself included, a little bit too often. And, it's when we do more than one thing at a time. It's become kind of habitual, especially with all these smartphones in our hands. They encourage us to multitask. They make us think we're good at it. And they tempt us all the time, with notifications and apps and things to take our attention. And the reality is that multitasking leads to us making more mistakes, taking longer to get things done. And we have a feeling of being overwhelmed, that there's always something we have to do and we're not getting done. And so monotasking is really the opposite of all those ideas. Instead of doing multiple things at once, you choose one to focus on. You do it well, you tend to do better work, make fewer mistakes, and get less stressed out. And you're more connected in the real world, not like the technical connections. So it's really good for us. And I think that's why we should care about it and apply it at home and at work, in our relationships, and really anywhere that we want to get more done.
Yeah. You touch on something that I think is an important topic for us to kind of explore a little bit more, which is, you mentioned the word overwhelm. And I think that kind of what you're proposing is counterculture. A lot of culture is about this hustle, grind, do it all kind of mentality. And it's really a disservice to us if we try and do everything at once, yet we feel this pressure and eventually this overwhelm of, man, how do I maintain all of this? How do I juggle all of these responsibilities at the same time? What have you found has been an effective way of getting people out of that mindset of the hustle, the grind, the everything kind of pursuit into the presence and mindfulness of monotasking?
So I had to come up with a lot of these ideas on my own for my own life, because I was trying to do too many things at once. And I was stressed out, I was burnt out, I was exhausted all the time. And my to-do list didn't get any shorter. Just because I crossed off a few things. Like, it just amazingly, like, things keep getting added to the list. Like, if you want to get more done and be successful. Yeah. So, what I found when I looked back at my own life, I'm an entrepreneur. I have a company called Juniper Books that I've run for about 20 years. I've been a parent of 2 teenagers, very involved in their lives. And, I have the hobbies I love: cycling, skiing, hiking. I live in Colorado. And I want to have like a social life and do all the things. And I think, all the listeners and most people do as well. And what I found is that, you can do all the things you want to do in life if you don't try to do them all at the same time. And you can, so monotasking is not about doing less. Like, you should still have a very colorful, full life and do all the things that make you happy and successful. But if you bring your attention to one at a time, you'll do all of them much better. And you'll have this feeling of peace and calm. And you'll be much more sustainable in your energy level, in your ability to be creative and successful and come up with great ideas and work hard when you need to, if you pace yourself and you monotask and just try to be present in the moment all the time with everything you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the word that comes to mind, or I guess the words, are richness and potency, right? And it's really being able to, you said color, right? But it's being able to experience things at a little kind of a deeper sentiment, and letting yourself extract the full value of what you're doing. And even this morning, knowing that we were speaking today, I was at the gym and I was lifting and I was listening to a podcast episode, and I got really self-conscious about the idea of, wow, am I actually not getting the full value of my exercise because I'm listening? And am I not getting the full value of listening because I'm also exercising, right? So there is this kind of balance of trying to, incorporate all of those different pieces. So I guess the way I'd like to segue that is to ask another question related to our psychology, right? So if we are trying to do multiple things at the same time, psychologically, what is happening? Kind of this attention splitting that's occurring, like how does that actually affect our ability to extract value, to access that richness and color that you were speaking on?
It's a great question. That's a great example too, at the gym and listening to a podcast. And a few definitions that might be helpful here. So when we think we're multitasking, what we're actually doing is task switching. So we're switching from one thing to another because cognitively our brains can't actually process two tasks that require our attention at the same time. 2% of people in the world can actually do two things with their cognitive abilities at the same time. The rest of us, I think, are in the 98%. And that's okay. Like, we should just be okay with that and understand it and adapt accordingly. But most people can do what's called background tasking and primary tasking at the same time. So you were listening to a podcast, probably in the background, working out in the foreground. Another example might be folding laundry while listening to an audiobook, cleaning the house, things like that. So it's not so much about never multitasking, but bringing some awareness to when you're monotasking, when you need to, for like doing your best work, starting or being in a relationship where you want to be really close to the person, hear everything they say and make them feel valued. And then you can make a conscious decision to multitask, whether it's primary tasking and background tasking or task switching, because you have so much to do and you just feel like you should do it. One more definition that's helpful is the idea of how long it takes to get back, well, basically to go from one task to another. There's this idea of attention residue, where it basically takes 20 minutes to go from one deep thinking task to another. And so you can't just answer an email, hop on a Zoom call, work on a presentation, talk to your kids. It's a little too much. And those 20 minutes of attention residue really stress us out, and we don't know why. So it's helpful to keep a lot of those ideas in mind as you're starting to monotask more and bring some awareness to it.
Right. Yeah. And what you ended on there, I think, is a perfect point to inject here, which is, if you talk about the intention of monotasking, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think the intention is to monotask everything every minute of every day. That would, essentially not allow us, like you said, there's background tasking, there's important, processes that need to happen in parallel or at the same time. And that's kind of, I think, a layer to really explore with this. Is the intention of monotasking is to bring more presence to opportunities where you should be monotasking instead of feel pressure to always monotask. Would you agree with that?
100%. Yeah. And I think if you acknowledge that everything in 21st century life right now, we're all in the same world, the same, we all deal with the same tech companies and apps and, hardware and software and all that. It's all set up to fragment our attention more and more and more. If we do more things in each moment, there's more ads to sell, more things to pay for, more shopping to do, more tasks to accomplish, whatever. So if you just acknowledge that it's distracting, it's not our fault. We can give into it when we want to, when we're done for the day, we're burnt out, whatever. Not necessarily burnt out, but we're just done. And we want to sit on the couch and have dinner and watch Netflix and have your phone open, texting with somebody. That's totally fine. It's not about never multitasking. Just when you want to and need to do what you want to do, you should reclaim your attention, decide to monotask, and resist the temptation to be, hijacked by someone else. And the book is really about how to build the monotasking muscles, I call them, in order to be able to do that. To say, oh, they're just trying to distract me. I'm going to, regain control of my attention and apply it where I want to.
Yeah, no. So let's dive into the book. I think that's perfect. Yep. Right. So the 12 monotasks as you have eloquently shared, right? I'm just going to read through them so that other people can know kind of where we're coming from. So it's reading, walking, listening, sleeping, eating, getting there, which I kind of associate as travel, learning, teaching, playing, seeing, creating, thinking. 12 monotasks. That basically makes up our entire existence, right? Are those 12 different things, which is fantastic. For those of us who may not quite yet see the value in, okay, if I do this one thing exclusively, that I find value in doing it exclusively, right? So that point is important. If I don't quite understand that I can actually do more and do better by doing less, could you give us one example of a monotask where it's like, oh, well, if you were to do this, then this would be the outcome, and this would be, kind of an improved result because you monotasked versus, the alternative.
So I could have written a book that was like, how to monotask and get more of your work done. But when I looked at, like, it would have been, I thought, kind of a boring book and not really true to life. Like, it's not just about our work, right? How do I get to inbox 0 or something? When I looked at our lives and like where our time and our attention and our energy go, like you said, these 12 things take up almost everyone's life. You do them all at least once a week, probably. Some people do them every day. And so they're kind of an indirect way to build your attention and be able to get your work done and cultivate closer relationships and more happiness in life. A good example of one that maybe people don't think of as being related to work is sleep. So, we all have to get a good night's sleep every night. It helps us heal our bodies, build memories, just be better rested and have more energy the next day. So if you monotask your sleep, there are two parts of it. You monotask the part while you're awake, making a plan, setting up your bedroom, the lighting, when you're going to eat and hydrate and things like that during the day. If you're going to try out a supplement to help you or something like that, how you're going to let go of the thoughts from the day and what you need to do tomorrow. And then there's the part where you actually sleep and you try to stay focused on sleep throughout the night and not reach for your phone in the middle of the night. So there's a lot of tips in the book about things like that and how they can improve your overall life.
Yeah. And I love that. I mean, I love getting into more of kind of the tactical, actionable sides of this. Like you said, that was kind of the intent of the book, is to be able to give people the resources they need to not just understand the value of monotasking, but to do it more often. So something that I'm a huge advocate for are building systems in your life, right? So being able to set up the infrastructure, the environment that are conducive to the behaviors or the intentions that you want to execute on or exhibit. So if someone is looking to incorporate some more monotasking, and maybe pick your favorite monotask, but what would be an example of a system that you could use that would then bring your awareness to, okay, I need to be more present in this task, and then encourage people to be, a more successful monotasker?
Sure. Well, I think I'll give two examples. So one is maybe a little bit obvious. So reading is the first monotask in the book. And reading is where I started, both because I've kind of built a career in the world of books and encouraging people to have more books and read, but also because I think it meets the definition of a true monotask. Like, you can't read a book without monotasking it. Mm-hmm. If your attention wanders, you have to go back. It's not like the movie version where you can kind of half pay attention and you still get it. Like, we probably all have the experience, like you're flipping the pages and you're like, I can't remember anything. Like, I was just doing that, while I was thinking about something else. So I say, do something every day that builds your attention. Reading is a great one. I love to read because it just makes me more focused. It settles my mind, calms my nervous system. It's not for everyone these days, especially right now. So some people who read the book skip ahead, practice the other monotasking chapters, build their attention spans, and then come back and start reading again. That's a little bit ironic because it's a book, but when you have to read it. But I get it. Like, we have to meet people where they're at to help them build the systems that work for them. So monotasking with your attention and then reclaiming it so you can read a book and stay focused is a good one. Another, you mentioned the getting there chapter a little while ago, and how travel comes to mind for you. I think depending on whether people commute to work, if they do a lot of driving, they have different impressions of what that chapter is all about, which is great. And, for me, it started with this idea of like, why do people text and drive? If multitasking could kill you or someone else, like, why would you multitask? And yet we all do it. I mean, I say we all just to make everybody feel okay with it. I don't do it. But, the idea that you should pay attention while you're on a journey, while you're driving, while you're taking a train, while you're on the plane, like we tend to think of those as times where like, oh, I can get stuff done. I can do something else while I'm traveling. But what if we brought our full attention to the journey? Could we see things that we've never seen before? Could we meet the person next to us and strike up a great conversation that may change our lives? You don't have to do it every day. You still might need to use your commute to get some things done. But if you do it every now and then, like it can change your life. And just that perspective, that little shift can open you up to possibilities that weren't there before.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a really, underspoken byproduct of your work and kind of the message you're trying to share is, monotasking. Ultimately, what it does is it raises your awareness, right? If you're more present, you have more attention, and there's a whole spiritual side of awareness and the value of that. And, to kind of maybe quickly touch on that in an indirect way, something that is a through line of your work is kind of the connection between the brain, the body, and senses, right? So it's not just a singular task. Like this is a fully integrated kind of system that operates in coordination with everything. So could you, I don't really know what that means. I'd love to learn about it. So what is this kind of coordination between, the brain, the body, and the senses that you're describing? And how does that relate to monotasking specifically?
So I think in the world we live in today, we're not encouraged very often to be fully present. In addition to our attention being fragmented, like there's, a lot of things happen in the digital world, and they're two-dimensional at best. Whereas, if you contrast that to maybe the way life was a few decades ago, or when you unplug and you go out with your friends, go have dinner, like most things still happen in the real world, even though we spend a lot of our lives in the digital world. So we're still eating real food at a real restaurant with real people cooking it, with real people growing it. There's a whole chapter about eating in the book. And in that one, I do use the word mindful eating. And because there is a connection to mindfulness, I don't use the word that often through the book, because I do believe in like broadening the audience. I think the audience for monotasking and living a full life is 100% of the world. Whereas mindfulness like has its limits. There's some people who are going to say that's, too
Sure.
Eastern and mystical for me. But they are connected. And it's very much about what you said. I mean, it's living a full life with your full attention and being in touch with like how your body feels and how it navigates through the world, whether you're walking or whether you're skiing in the playing chapter, or even when you're thinking, and like how you adjust your ergonomics to do your best thinking and to create the systems where you can be creative. There's a chapter on creating that's separate from thinking, and I draw some distinctions between the two, but they're important. And it's important for us to not always be told kind of in the digital world, like, here's what's going to work for you, and here's a plan you have to follow. And, to really like check in with yourself, observe yourself, what works for you. That's monotasking. And then applying the lessons that you learned to do your best work, your best thinking, your best playing, your best sleeping. That's monotasking too. So it's all very holistic.
Yeah, I love that you touched on that. Something that came up earlier in this high performance masterclass is the idea of experimentation. And, you cannot be a high performer until you know what works, and you can't figure out what works without trying different things. So even this process of reconciling your own decisions, choices, environments, postures, as you mentioned, all of those are micro influencers to an ultimate result. So I love that came up, because I think there's, when people think of high performance, they think of, well, no mistakes, always on 100%. It's like, no, in order to be a high performer, I think what's more important is the growth element of it, right? There is not a ceiling to what you're doing. It's that you're always pushing the boundary. And that's kind of the identity of a high performer. And that process of experimentation and presence and observation of your own behaviors, choices, etc., is extremely important. So thank you for touching on that. Before wrapping up here, I'd love to just kind of give you the floor, and if there's anything we didn't touch on related to monotasking or other elements of your work that relates to this topic, I'd love to hear if there's anything that really resonates that would complement what we've already talked about.
Just to add to what you just said, I mean, I mentioned in the thinking chapter about how we've outsourced so much of our thinking to our devices and to other people, whether they're pundits or politicians or anybody. We've given up like a lot of the things that we used to do ourselves. It could be like remembering how to get somewhere, could be making up our own mind about an issue, and I think what you just said about experimentation is really important in that regards. That we shouldn't just follow even somebody's productivity tips or sleep tips or anything, like without seeing if it works for us. Mm-hmm. Like that's another element of like multitasking, essentially, where we say like, I'm just going to give myself over to that person for this part of my life, and then I'm going to focus on something else that I'm good at over here, my zone of genius or whatever. But not everything you hear or read or see like is going to work for you. So you should definitely use the monotasking principles to figure out what works for you. Maybe 50% of that person's tips do. And then you adapt your own and share, teach somebody. There's a chapter on teaching in the book too. Teach somebody what you discovered. Technology is great. Social media is great. Like in the opportunity it gives you to share those tips and connect with other people. So I think there is a responsible way we can use social media and technology to improve our lives and not continue to outsource our thinking and not make the decisions or figure out what works for ourselves. So I think that's where, a lot of it can come together and people can adapt it to really make monotasking work for them in their lives.
Yeah, no, I completely hear where you're coming from. And even I got, reflective on kind of self-improvement daily, what I'm doing here. It's 2 minutes of personal development every single day. And I couldn't possibly do everything perfectly like I share it. It really is just a vehicle for exposure and consideration, so that when something resonates for me, I implement it. When something resonates for someone else, they implement it, right? And I think, like you said, with social media, there's this opportunity where the accessibility of these ideas are unprecedented, but it's a matter of integrating what works for you, and understanding what works for you is the real secret sauce to extracting the value in it. I've been really focused on converting intention into action, right? And I feel like when you learn something, that intention is inspired, but then actually putting that into action is the next step. So monotasking is the best way to be able to get that focused attention and intention converted into action. And I appreciate the perspective. So Thatcher, you're the man. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for coming on, and keep up the good work.
This was great. Thanks, Brian.
There you have it. High Performance Masterclass complete. With all of the information you've heard today, I think what's most important is actually that final point in the conversation with Thatcher. Your role in this is to pick what stood out to you, to try it, to experiment with it, and see how it can work best for you. With Thatcher's work, we've only scratched the surface, and if you want to learn more about monotasking, I highly recommend that you check out his book, The 12 Monotasks, which is linked in the description. Now, if you've made it this far in the masterclass, then you're really bought in, and I am super proud of you, and I love to see it. So I want you to be a part of everything we're creating here together. Beyond these live podcast interviews, there are going to be other incredible sessions and workshops I'll be hosting in the Better Together community, and you're not going to want to miss it. So please join the Better Together community by clicking the link in the description. That's it. Thanks for joining the masterclass. You grew a lot today. Let's do it again tomorrow on Self-Improvement Daily.